Welcome on in. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. The NFL season starts a week from today, so we all know a lot of drafts going on this weekend. We're here to give you some last-minute tips, last-minute bits of advice for your home leagues to help you dominate this weekend. We're also going to break down our final kind of best ball portfolios, who we are most leveraged on, who we have kind of found ourselves to be a little bit lightweight on as the best ball season has kind of, for the most part, come to a close. Let's start the show. Welcome on in. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, John McKechnie. That is Mario Puig. Again, as I alluded to there in the short intro, we got a week until games are here with the Ravens and the Chiefs squaring off next Thursday night to officially kick off the season. And if you're like me, you still have a lot of drafts still to do. I'm in the midst of a slow best ball draft as part of the fantasy football pentathlon put on by our friend and former colleague Derek Van Riper. But my friends are pretty chronic procrastinators. So I have two home league drafts coming up on Wednesday night, the night before the season starts. And, I got some lessons to learn from this as well, because we're getting into the nitty gritty. I've done my industry drafts. I've done pretty much as many best balls as I can muster. I'm tired of looking at them at this point. It's like, okay, I'm just going to auto pick
soft
Michael Wilson in the 13th round and just keep going, like that type of stuff. So yes, I am soft, but I've just been broken down. I'm malleable. But Mario, for you, I want to kind of start the show from the broader scope of things as we get into this late part of draft season. Then I'll hit you with some specific to-dos and some don'ts for everyone to remember over the weekend, because obviously Labor Day weekend, huge draft weekend. So off the top of your head, what are some things that you like to keep in mind here as we get here to the end?
Well, especially if you've been drafting already for some amount of time, one thing that you want to be a little bit ready for is just the possibility that the ADP is kind of lying to you. And you might think it wouldn't apply to that many players. You might think it would only apply to players who got cut, or I guess like the holdout cases. It's of course those kinds of things are weird markets in general right now, but just with that sort of last second, moment of truth kind of sort of dynamic, what happens at this point in time, it's just going to kind of make everybody at once, including you, sort of just get drilled down to your honest to God opinion on something in a way that you didn't even necessarily know you believed it before, because you kind of needed to be forced into a pressure situation to really, face it straight on. And so you might, for instance, kind of have the realization while you're not even on the clock yet, you're waiting for a player that you knew you liked, but you're waiting for this pick now, and you're only realizing now just how much you really got your hopes up on getting them in particular. And if they make it to your next pick in that situation, I would say just go ahead and take them, even if it's 12 or whatever, 13, 14 spots ahead from the listed ADP. And certainly that's even more the case for home leagues, because home leagues are just their own little worlds entirely. It's, even outside of the the public leagues of ESPN, which of course are very different from the, sharper, probably groups of drafters on whatever other best ball site. It's your home league could have a very different ecosystem than even the ESPN rankings, which even with those rankings being as different from the ones that we often cite here. So definitely know the crowd. And yeah, if you have that sort of spidey sense of anxiety or whatever about one of your guys getting away, maybe go ahead and assume they will if you don't take them.
Yeah, so definitely, it's a time to just get your guys. You don't have to worry about spreading out your exposure like you do on best ball, that type of thing. these are managed leagues with your buddies in most cases. Like, just go ahead and get your guys. And I think an interesting dynamic when it comes to home leagues is, unlike best ball, where everyone is kind of nameless and faceless as far as who you're drafting against. Like, your pals, their tendencies, their rooting interests, like, for instance, for me, when I'm drafting with my college buddies, they are as much of Falcons fans as there can be. I don't think that there's a overly serious Falcons fan contingent. We'll see if this year kind of changes that. But I know, for example, that Drake London might go ahead of ADP. Bijan Robinson, same deal. All those guys might kind of hate Kyle Pitts. So I don't know. We'll see on that front. Or if you're in a league with a bunch of Packers friends, just to kind of have an expectation that maybe those players get pushed up a little bit, or maybe the rival type of players get pushed down a little. Before we get on to our next point, we do have a question, a Superflex, a deep league question. Dynasty Superflex, a handcuff stash. Who would you prefer, Mario, between Skylar Thompson and Josh Dobbs? So this is like last end of your roster spot. This is big, like I'm assuming 30 man team type of setup here. But
yeah, I'd go with Dobbs. Honestly, I'm not giving Thompson much of a shake there. I just don't think he's even like a CFL quarterback, let alone an NFL one. Whereas Dobbs at least can run, and he's shown that he's some version of a quarterback too at the NFL level. So yeah, that's what I'd go with. I
tend to agree. Moving on, some more last minute draft tips and advice. I feel like it's really important to just know your league scoring as well. Like, understand the difference between and how it changes the calculus for your quarterbacks. If it's a 4-point per passing touchdown league versus a 6-point per passing touchdown league. Also be sure to, have in mind if it's a half-point PPR versus a full-point PPR, what that means for the player pool, who that bumps up and who that bumps down. And then, again, with a lot of these home leagues being hosted on like ESPN and Yahoo, just make sure that you get a good look, especially if you've been drafting elsewhere all summer, to get eyes on the ADP, because there are some players that have a starkly different ADP on those sites than they do on say Underdog or DraftKings or wherever your best ball interest might be. Like, so for example, Nico Collins is a mid third rounder, and he goes ahead of Drake London, who is also a mid third rounder. Alvin Kamara is also a third rounder on ESPN. So like that type of thing to keep in mind. Are any surprises there for you?
I guess not really. I think wide receivers, especially in Underdog's case, of course, but even in just the high stakes ish, ostensibly like sharp regions of fantasy football, the receivers are going to go higher than they do in those, usually anyway, in those home leagues or those ESPN ones, because it's ESPN, particularly like ESPN and CBS and those sites, they kind of like they came up and took the place that they did while the 12 team like standard scoring was often the case. And I think there's probably a little bit of like a residual the prior culture of everybody taking a running back in the first round and 15 of the first like 20 picks being running backs. Like that probably isn't entirely gone yet. The same as like on these, some of these newer, sharper sites where these a lot of the drafting players are just sort of taking it as a day trading kind of thing. They don't have any familiarity of the running back dynamics either. So there's like a cultural difference in addition to the point blank like ADP difference. Is like it's just kind of different worlds.
They are. So that's just super important to keep in mind that your roster construction, which is just super key to begin with, it's just going to look different on these home league sites like ESPN and Yahoo versus what you're going to see elsewhere in the higher stakes type of realm. Before we get on to some like other kind of player specific things to keep in mind for this weekend, we do have a message from our friend at Fantasy Sports Knockout. Fantasy Sports Knockout, where a fantasy league meets a knockout pool, an innovative take on fantasy football. The concept is simple. Choose a new fantasy lineup each week and score points the same way you would in any fantasy league, but you must choose your players wisely. You can only use one player each week, only one player one time. The lowest weekly score or group of scores is eliminated from the contest every week. The concept may be simple, but survival is not. How will you play? Load up early or play the matchups and save the better players for later? Fantasy Sports Knockout. Can you survive the fantasy? Sign up at play.fantasysportsknockout.com today. And our guys over at Blue Wire who host our podcast, they are our podcasting network. They got a little something to pass along. So, dearest podcast listener, how does an extra $500 sound to you? I think it sounds pretty good, personally. All you got to do, go to bluewirepods.com/survey and complete the Blue Wire audience survey about you and your podcast listening habits for a chance to win a $500 gift card. This survey will help create a better advertising experience for audiences and in turn help this very show. We want that, don't we, folks? Make sure to read the full terms and the disclaimer, plus complete the survey for a chance to win. That's bluewirepods.com/survey, where all you have to do is answer some simple questions for that chance to win $500. bluewirepods.com/survey. Now here's some ads from the Blue Wire Network. Okay. Moving onward, some more draft tips this weekend. All right, say, Mario, you're in your home league. You get the first overall pick. Are you taking Christian McCaffrey still?
Yeah. I don't see any reason to have changed anything there.
Okay, just making sure. I know there was some hand wringing earlier on in the summer when he pulled up with the calf injury, but I think things have kind of settled down, and really no one else has had like the compelling case to sort of overtake him as the first overall pick. So, like, for example, over on ESPN, McCaffrey's ADP is 1.3. The next highest ADP is 4.0 with CeeDee Lamb checking that box, the recently paid CeeDee Lamb. Speaking of recently paid, or maybe on the other end of that, Jamar Chase looks like his hold in continues. So his ADP is right around the 8th overall pick. So if you're drafting in that range where he's still on the board and you're a late first round draft slot, what's your thinking here when it comes to Chase at this stage?
I don't know how anyone could have a definite correct answer for this. We're dealing with at least a few unknown variables, and we just are not in a position to know. So if someone is not interested in taking Chase at 8 because they're just kind of like, I don't need this headache, and it might be a headache, I don't know how you tell them that they're wrong. It looks kind of like a headache right now, but at the very least, it's safe to say, at 8 overall, 9, wherever Chase might fall to now, that's a good amount later than he was going all offseason up until, I guess, like a day or two ago. So even if you're not feeling like that sold on Chase at that price, especially if you're drafting, a decent number of teams, it just kind of might be one of those things where it's just too good of a deal if he does play all year, and if you already being invested kind of toward other possibilities. It's like if you're a little light on Chase, like, why not get him at 8th overall instead of at like 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever people have been getting him for all off season. But yeah, just the same, I don't think you could really tell anyone like, oh, it's definitely the right move to take him or whatever, because it's so easy for it to turn either way. And on the whims of like Mike Brown, do we really? And that guy was weird, stingy his whole life, and now he's like 90 years old. That probably didn't help. So I don't know. I took Chase at 8 in a $150 NFFC best ball thing today. So that's where I'm putting my money that one time. But I was also like, I used every minute of the clock going back and forth the whole time. So it's not easy.
Yeah, pacing about. It's a tough call because like your first round pick is important. Like you need him to at least like when your first overall or first round pick is a dud, it really kind of like puts you behind the eight ball, and you need other players that you draft later to kind of return that first round value, and that's obviously a lot to ask. It's much easier said than done, and it's not even that easy when you say it. So it's tricky. I've been kind of pounding the table all off season, working on this theory that I think Jamar Chase would be my pick for Offensive Player of the Year. I think that in another timeline, like this would be his peak season. I think that the best is yet to come, but the lack of off-season work and the sheer kind of acrimony that's existing right now between him and the Bengals, it does kind of scare you a little bit to where like if I had the pick and it's between Chase and Justin Jefferson, I'm probably taking Jefferson, even though he's tethered to Sam Darnold and Chase is tied to Joe Burrow. But I wonder resolution wise if we see something kind of similar to maybe what we saw week 1 with the Chiefs last year and Chris Jones, where Jamar Chase doesn't play the way that Chris Jones didn't play. Bengals struggle, and that sort of ends up being like the best leverage point that he could get, or that could possibly be out there, and the deal gets done right after that. I don't know. That's just one thought I had.
Right. I don't know what the precedent or the case study we would look toward would be in this case, but it seems to me that there's no way the Bengals can run their offense without Chase. Like if he's not there, it's just kind of the whole plan for the year is just off, and there's nothing they can do about it until he's back. Then again, we also don't know what kind of pressure the coaches can put on Mike Brown, so it's not. It doesn't work the same way with each team, and different owners are different levels of crazy and stingy. So it's what might be true with Chase on another team just can't be taken for a given with the Bengals. But I would assume that Chase is probably keeping himself in shape. I don't know. I'm only assuming that, but just given like the level of player the caliber of player that he is, I think that's someone who works really hard, even if he is really talented. So if he's in shape and he's out there in week 1, even if it's Bobby Boucher showing up at halftime kind of thing, it's like, well, he'll probably finish the game with 4 catches, so if not more. So I think the upside kind of makes the risk worth it up to a certain point. Like if you somehow do 5 drafts in the next 2 days and you get the 8th pick every time, maybe don't take Chase more than 2 times if he falls that far. I was planning on taking Justin Jefferson, and then Jefferson went 7th in my draft. So that's how that ended up happening. And if I had to do it a few more times in a row, I might do it differently after 2 or 3 times.
So another receiver with kind of a similar setup is obviously Brandon Aiyuk. The trade rumors were kind of dominating the news cycle there for a few weeks earlier on in August. That doesn't seem to be quite as much the lead story now. It's more just about his hold in, hold out, however you want to put it. And, you see these receiver contracts coming in, and Aiyuk wants to, at least match the new market standard with CeeDee Lamb or exceed it, which I'm not so like. I think Brandon Aiyuk is
I don't believe that. I don't believe that. And that's, you got to understand too, not you, John, the average person who just sees these news reports. You got to ask yourself where that report came from, because it's not like just Josina Anderson or whoever just hearing it in the wind and then putting it up. It's like someone with an interest in creating a certain understanding or another in the public went to the press with the expectation that the press would give it to that audience, and sometimes as parts of quid pro quos. So when it makes so much sense for the 49ers to put to leak a report like that. I think Dallas did this with Dak Prescott a few years ago too. Like Dallas leaked like, oh, Dak Prescott wants to be paid more than Pat Mahomes. And then Dak came out and was like, no, I didn't. What are you talking about? It's like, well, the team wanted the press to create pressure on Dak Prescott to take the lower offer, because now there's all these people, these fans were like, you greedy bastard. Why would you not take that offer? You think you're better than Pat Mahomes? It's like, no, I never said that. The press just said that. And, that's kind of, that's what the level of, where the 49ers are at in their bag of tricks now is like they it's like the same way they leaked the announcement. Like, yeah, we Aiyuk's coming to practice tomorrow. They didn't believe that. They just wanted to create the press reaction, the public reaction of like, oh, he's not here. Actually, he lied. Like they want to do that
Right.
kind of thing. So I don't believe the 49ers. I think they just believe that Aiyuk should have to accept a certain number, or that failing that the Steelers should have to offer more than they have, which is otherwise the highest offer that anyone's given them. But it's like, this is the market reality for you. You either pay Aiyuk or you take the highest offer, and they're just saying, no fair. We're taking the ball. We're going home.
So it's getting ugly. And like, I already kind of had some suspicions about the 49ers this year, the cumulative scar tissue of the way that the last couple of seasons have ended. And, they kind of lost a lot from that defense, especially up front. I thought so. Like, the defense wasn't going to be as much of a lock to be a dominant presence this year, and, more pressure potentially being put on Brock Purdy. What are the odds that Christian McCaffrey makes it through the season with that level of workload that's expected of him, completely healthy once again? We just don't know. Deebo Samuel's been banged up before. George Kittle is famously
Trent
almost
Williams,
always
John?
banged up. Trent Williams. I mean, that's it. I mean, that offensive line without Trent Williams, if you look at it, is a bunch of guys that you've probably never heard of. Yeah. So, I'm going to a legal betting state this weekend, and I'm definitely putting down on the Niners to finish under 11.5 wins. But when it comes to Aiyuk, I do have an interesting recent anecdote that I wanted to throw at you. So I'm in this best ball draft with a bunch of industry people. Jeff Erickson's in it, Scott Pianowski, Derek Van Riper, a handful of other folks. And it's ongoing. It's a slow one. And I didn't expect to take Brandon Aiyuk in this one. It's being hosted by our friends over at the NFFC. But at a certain point, and I'm talking about the fourth pick in the fifth round, Aiyuk was still available. And at that point, I'm just like, I guess I have to take him. Like that, the other options would have been Tank Dell, Terry McLaurin, or George Pickens, or Zay Flowers, who fell actually a little bit in that draft as well. But I figured, even with the risk involved with Aiyuk potentially missing time into the season, I don't know. I feel like if he falls that far, like I'm comfortable like being the stopper of the slide, as it were.
Yeah, especially if you haven't already gotten a lot of exposure to Aiyuk to this point. I think I have concerns about his target volume, in be it with the 49ers or the Steelers, but Aiyuk is pretty much a lock for high efficiency returns, especially in San Francisco. So it's a tough call, kind of like the Chase thing, but this one being cheaper and the alternatives being less compelling than in Chase's instance, then it seems like you should feel pretty comfortable making that pick there.
I felt like that. And yeah, I frankly, I hadn't been drafting Aiyuk basically all summer, where he was going, just because, it's been kind of telegraphed out there that, something was brewing between him and the Niners pretty much all off season. And, I just was wondering if it could be what he did last year, what was totally repeatable and all that stuff. But in the fifth round, it's a totally different discussion.
And he does have that extreme upside. Not that it's fun to think about, but if Deebo misses time or Kittle misses time, then Aiyuk can pretty easily push for that kind of top 20 sort of range.
Yeah, 100%. So I guess all this to say that I'm buying the dip to a certain extent on Aiyuk, and I could see him kind of routinely falling in leagues across hosting services here as draft season comes to a close. Our guy Isaac has a question for us. Thoughts on Kenneth Walker and Javonte Williams for this season? I haven't drafted a lot of Kenneth Walker. I think it's mostly just kind of where he goes. He's sort of a running back that's on an island ADP wise, like relative to other players. Like oftentimes I'm more looking to draft tight end or wide receiver at that point. I've either got my running back targets kind of circled for a couple rounds later, or I've already taken enough running backs at that point. So Walker, I just simply haven't gotten a ton of. You feel
You'd put him
comfortable
ahead
with these
of, or would you put him ahead of Javonte in general?
Yes, I think
Okay.
he's worth at least a couple rounds ahead of Javonte, even with Javonte kind of like trending upwards as we get into the season. But I'm more inclined to take Javonte where he goes and Kenneth Walker where he goes.
Yeah, fair enough. I think both players have something of workload ceiling concerns. Charbonnet and maybe even McIntosh in the case of Seattle, and then McLaughlin, Estime in the case of Denver. But the tiebreaker for me is I think Kenneth Walker's a little bit better of a player, and I think the Seahawks offense could be quite a bit better than the Denver one.
Yeah, I mean, I think Denver is not going to be basement level the way that it's been the last couple of years. Maybe I'm a little bit too
I think they
excited
will
about
be, but it'll be a nicer basement. There's a carpet in the basement.
a
There's
finished basement.
we've killed some of the roaches. That's where Denver is at now, I think.
Yeah, like the Boar's Head factory. Oh, there goes our deli meat sponsor. Whoops.
That stuff's so gross, man.
Oh my god, horrible. I read the Jungle in high school just like everybody else did. Ick. All right. On that note, before we anything else to kind of pass along to as far as redraft tips for this weekend?
No, I just more than anything, I think just kind of do what you feel like, really, and yeah, don't get stingy trying to get your guys in the next round if you've got the slightest fear they won't make it back.
Yes, very important to bear that in mind. And I guess one more topic du jour. I think it's pretty well established that if you're listening to this pod, our thoughts on Kyren Williams at ADP. But did the punt return news do anything for you this week? Like, did it make you freak out more than you normally would?
I don't think it's a big deal, really, but I do think it indicates or it maybe corroborates the idea that the Rams are maybe trying to lessen the amount of carries between the tackles that they give to Kyren Williams this year, like those real power design carries, which he'll still get a lot of, and maybe even the more of between himself and Corum. But last year they were putting like 60, 70 snaps a game on Williams, and he's 5'9", 195. So especially if you're giving him the power carries, you're putting him at risk physically. I think Corum's there to lessen that burden, and just because that helps Kyren in general. And then from that point, they're like, hey, we got a little more bandwidth we can put on Kyren now. Why not punt returns, since you don't get hit that hard usually. If you're good at it, you don't get hit that hard. If you keep your head on a swivel and you don't get surprised by the gunners, you can usually either fair catch or sort of just get 10 yards without too much trouble, and it's good for the Rams, but I would not see it as good for Kyren Williams. Just the same, I wouldn't go changing projections over it either.
He was. I took a look at his college football stats page, and he averaged like 10 yards a punt return, which is pretty strong.
His final year, yeah, he did pretty good. And it makes sense that he would be pretty good at it. You don't need speed at punt returner as much as you do at kick returner, because it's more about like reacting quickly and missing like one or two gunners and then just getting upfield quickly. And Williams seems good at that kind of stuff.
Exactly. We do have a super comment from our guy, Dragon. I hope I'm not butchering your name. I'm sorry if I did. But either way, we appreciate the super comment. Dragon's got the second overall pick in a 12-team PPR format. What's your thoughts on hero running back and taking Breece Hall there, and then following it up with going heavy receiver, or would you go make sure you get your tight end? I suppose when I'm in that spot, I'm definitely comfortable taking Breece Hall and then hammering the receivers and other positions that I like, and kind of waiting until that like James Conner, DeAndre Swift pocket of running backs to get the rest of my backfield filled out, and just really try to focus then on just making sure that I'm leaving like the sixth round with at least three receivers, and then if I have a tight end that I like that falls to me in a good spot, whether it's Dalton Kincaid or Kyle Pitts or in the following round, I like doing that. I think if you go that route and you're playing a little bit of catch up at receiver, I think the position that you can kind of not punt on, but wait a little bit more is quarterback. Because I think once you get to like the Caleb Williams tier, I think you still have a lot of viable options later on in the draft, as opposed to like, your receivers tend to be a little bit more lottery ticket-ish once you get to that stage. What do you think, Mario?
Yeah, I think Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson as high as second overall, or even first overall. I've seen both go first overall sometimes. It makes sense. The reasoning checks out because they can be 300 carry, 50, 60 catch running backs, which is obviously worth a great deal, game changer in fantasy. So I think it makes sense to take those guys in. As far as the hero approach goes, picking as high as you are, and especially if you don't have the third round reversal, that would be another reason to nudge yourself toward more the hero running back than taking another one in the next 4 or 5 rounds, because in that range you'll either, like you said, like you hinted at, go either wide receiver heavy from that pick, and maybe you can fit in one quarterback or one tight end in that too. But generally, if you take a quarterback or a tight end, and especially if you take a quarterback and a tight end in your first 5 rounds, you're going to go thin at receiver. Even if you end up going kind of thin at running back, you'll still go thin at receiver that way. So I've done that in best ball sometimes, because you can get Mahomes, and then back in the day you could get Marquise Brown and Rashee Rice for cheaper. And in best ball it makes sense, but in redraft you can't really rely on the swarm, and so you need those killer receivers, or at least they pay off more in that format. So if you're taking Hall at 2, I would try to get at least 2. I would go probably 2 receivers in your next 2 picks, and then maybe start looking quarterback or tight end.
Yeah, I think that's a sharp strategy from there. But whereas earlier on in draft season, the idea of taking Breece at 2 seemed crazy. I think at this stage, as we get closer to go time, I think Breece totally makes sense. And then you just kind of try to attack with volume as far as your receiver picks go in the next handful of selections. We do have a message from our friends over at Verse Fantasy, though. That's exciting. Why wait all season to win in fantasy? With Verse Fantasy, you can cash in every single week. Download the Verse app, sync your fantasy league, and start wagering and winning today. Verse Fantasy is the new way to play fantasy. There's no need to draft a new team or bring your league to a new platform. Simply sync your current league from ESPN, Sleeper, or Yahoo into the Verse Fantasy app and instantly get money lines, money lines and spreads for your league's matchups that week. Playing fantasy for fun is cool, but playing for real money is the future. Play for real money on your own underdog lines and place contest entries between primetime games to bet on your own comeback. Verse will even show you your odds for winning the title or being crowned the Sacco, every player's worst nightmare, of course. Enter the arena this season with Verse Fantasy and use promo code ROTO, that's ROTO, to get a 100% deposit match up to $50 when you sign up. Again, that was a message from our friends over at Verse Fantasy. We also got a message from our friends at Fantrax. Is there something you wish your fantasy league had, or features that are missing from your current leagues, like bonus scoring, custom schedules, or playoffs, deeper team settings? Well, look no further, because we have you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Fantrax even offers college fantasy football leagues. I got to make sure that my lineups are set, because week 1 is here. We had a little appetizer with week 0, but now the scoring begins tonight with week 1 getting kicked off. Really fun weekend in college football ahead. So looking forward to checking out my Fantrax lineups for that. Create or join a fantasy football commissioner league. Invite your friends and dominate your draft this season. Fantrax is the top dynasty fantasy football platform in the industry. Are you coming from another service? That's not a problem. Fantrax can easily import any of your current leagues and rosters. Ever have a trade go wrong or make a mistake in dropping a player? Fantrax commissioner tools allow you to undo any move with one simple click. Fantrax is running a special promo that you don't want to miss. Sign up for free at fantrax.com/rotowire today to enter for your chance to win tickets to any regular season NFL game for you and your entire league, plus $6,000 in spending cash. That's right. Tickets for your entire league. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing leagues for more chances to win. Simply go to fantrax.com/rotowire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. All right, Mario, as we round out the show here, get into the second half of it, as it were, let's go ahead and put our chips on the table. We're going to break down our most drafted players at each position from best ball season. I will start. We'll kind of lead things off with quarterback. My 3 most drafted quarterbacks for this season in best ball: Kirk Cousins, 32%; Will Levis, 21%; Caleb Williams, 21%. That's my trio. That's who I've hitched my wagon to. So that kind of signals that I've oftentimes, is skewed going after the high end quarterbacks, whether it's Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes. I do have a little bit more Mahomes than any of those other guys, but I found that in those setups, either waiting on Cousins to be my QB1 or taking someone like a Caleb Williams and then circling back a round or two later with Kirk Cousins was how I kind of like did my quarterback builds for the most part. And thirdly, like I just felt like Will Levis was a value all summer. I think that people are understandably gun shy when it comes to Levis. He showed some flashes last year, also showed some warts, puts mayonnaise in his coffee, eats the banana peels. Like I definitely understand just not being in on Will Levis. Plus, for years, the Titans offense has not been a font of fantasy production from the passing game, but I think they cleaned house. I don't think it was a great move to get rid of Mike Vrabel necessarily, but Derrick Henry's gone. I think that honestly, Will Levis is the best goal line option that they have when they get down there. And I think that Levis, he's got the mobility, he's got the arm talent. They bring in Calvin Ridley. Hopefully DeAndre Hopkins can kind of hit the ground running whenever he's back and active. I don't know. I'm not expecting a ton from Tyler Boyd necessarily, but I'm not expecting a lot from the run game either. I just think that Will Levis is going to kind of have to do it all, and I was willing to kind of like take that risk where he was going.
Yeah, fair enough. I ended up with a pretty well separated group of targets here. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 quarterbacks above 15%. At 15%, it was Russell Wilson, who I took as a quarterback 3 a handful of times in the last round. 19.2, Justin Herbert. 23.1, CJ Stroud. Mahomes, 23.1. Kirk Cousins, 26.9. 30.8 on Kyler and Dak Prescott both. So adjusting for cost, Mahomes is my most consistently targeted, I guess you'd say, because I would be taking him in the maybe 5th round, sometimes 4th, when I would pursue those Chiefs stacks, which I'm very high on. I think Mahomes is the quarterback 1 this year, if I had to call it. And I don't know where I'd rank CJ Stroud exactly, but I know I'd take him more than I did if it was 6 points per passing touchdown on Underdog. It's 4. So the rushing pays off a little bit more on Underdog than it does, for instance, on NFFC, where it's 6 point per passing touchdown, and a guy like CJ, a guy like Herbert gained some ground there. But both have Kirk Cousins in our top 3 at least.
Yeah, I'm glad that we share that same sentiment. Stroud and Kyler are in that next tier of exposure down for me. Both of them around 15%. Definitely, need big seasons out of them as well. Where were you on Caleb?
I didn't end up with him because I was always trying to get what would it be? Like, he would go usually as a quarterback 1, but I wouldn't want him as a quarterback 1. I'd want him as a quarterback 2. So sure. I just never really ended up in a position to take him a whole lot. Let me see if I might not have ended up with more than like. Actually, it seems like I have not drafted him. So yeah, I don't have any Caleb, but I have a ton of DJ Moore and a decent amount of Odunze. So it's not as if I'm low on the Bears passing game exactly.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Just like the way that the drafts fall, like he would theoretically have to be your first quarterback taken, but like that's why I have a lot of Kirk Cousins. I have a lot of Williams Cousins pairings. Just because I want the boring floor at the minimum to back up Caleb, which could be great, could have some rookie struggles. So I wanted something consistent to kind of match him up with. Running backs, my top 5. We'll expand it a little bit. Joe Mixon and DeAndre Swift are my most drafted, just under 30%. Chuba Hubbard, Devin Achane next up. Swift and Hubbard a little bit closer. Achane 20% and Ray Davis 20%. James Conner also 20% for me.
Nice. Yeah, I got Connor's at 6, tied with Swift, or sorry, Swift and Connor are tied at 5th, I should say, for me at 23.1. Jonathan Taylor, 26.9. So, like the Mahomes thing, it's like when adjusting for cost, I've pretty much targeted Taylor most aggressively, which isn't that shocking, I suppose. However, John, I've got 3 running backs where I've taken more than 40% of the time, which, to be clear, you shouldn't do that. Like I said last year, like no one's allowed to draft the way that I do because it's not responsible. But I just
Do as
hate
he says, not
making
as he
picks.
does.
Yeah, I hate making picks that I don't feel like making, and I whatever. If I have a bad season because guys got hurt, that's I guess more important to me than collecting voodoo dolls of various starting running backs and stabbing them all ritualistically so I could make $50 or whatever. But sorry, the 3 players that I was going to say: Josh Jacobs at 42.3%, Ray Davis at 46.2, and Chuba Hubbard on exactly half.
Okay, so we're lining up pretty closely. I guess our lack of overlap is in Achan and Mixon. I do have a good amount of Jacobs, and I have a couple drafts that are yet to finish where I've gotten Jacobs as well, and Jonathan
John,
Taylor.
I'd have more Mixon if I didn't take Taylor so much, but they both have a week 14 bye.
True.
So that's why I go with Connor instead usually.
Yeah, week 14 has really thrown a wrench in things this year. You got the Texans, the Ravens,
Broncos, not that anyone really
Indianapolis,
cares.
Indianapolis off. So yeah, it's tricky. I know that Houston and Baltimore play in week 17. I've started to like really draft for week 17 as we get on later. I have some really weird looking teams. All right, moving on. Receiver. I'm scared. I'm officially scared of how this shaped out. Hollywood Brown, come on down. Number 1 most exposure receiver. To be clear, I haven't drafted him at all since he hurt his shoulder, but and it became more and more obvious that Rashee Rice was just gonna get to play the whole season. Oops. Jermaine Burton next up for me. Don't feel great about that either necessarily, although acquisition cost not nearly what it was for Brown. Michael Wilson, Jalen Tolbert, Gabe Davis are kind of like, those are my highest exposure, but like I think it's probably more interesting as far as like who the high end receivers that I've gotten the most of. That would be DJ Moore, George Pickens, Drake London, and Cooper Kupp.
Interesting, especially London because he's a top 14 pick almost always on Underdog. So yeah, I have.
Me, I guess
this is still irresponsible, but I only took this guy in the 18th round, so whatever. I guess this is just the best I can do. DJ Chark at 65.4%. And that's a little bit too because I took Herbert a bunch of times, and I take all of Herbert, Chark in the 18th round in Chark's case, and Joshua Palmer, who I've got 46.2% of. So 2 of my top 3 receiver purchases are Chargers guys. One very cheap, but still, I think there's been too much doom and gloom around Herbert this year. And in between them, 53.8 is Gabe Davis, which I don't feel great about, but like he was going in like the 13th round constantly, especially a couple months ago before training camp, and he started going a little higher around then. So I couldn't pass on Davis in the 13th round, apparently upwards of 10 times. After that, I got Hollywood Brown at 42.3. I just took him in the 8th round of a draft that I did this morning, and I was heavy on him before the injury, but if he's going to go in like the 8th round, then in best ball, I'm just going to take more. Screw it. If he doesn't get hurt again, it'll still work, is what I'm telling myself. But anyway, Jalen Tolbert at 38.5, Rashee Rice at 34.6. So a lot of those Chiefs guys, Chargers, and Houston too. I got Diggs at 26.9 and Nico at 23.1. So a lot of Houston, a lot of Kansas City for me this year.
Those are pretty good offenses to be investing in as far as the old passing game is concerned. I also feel like I have a decent amount of Darnell Mooney.
Yeah, he's I think a good pick on most sites right now because he's going to play something like 800 snaps, should get upwards of 110 targets. I can't. Let me see what I got him at. I got him at 23.1 also, so that's a pretty decent amount.
All right. That feeling pretty good then. I just think that was one of those ones, especially on my cousin's teams. Like that's a nice way to get like a correlating piece for cheap. Moving on to tight end. I kind of just sprayed the board here. Like no crazy exposure rates here. I did take a lot of Hunter Henry. He's my most drafted tight end. No one's pumped about that.
It's a good pick though.
I felt like that too,
especially on underdog, because it's one thing. Hunter Henry loses a little bit in full point PPR, but if it's half point PPR, it's like that guy could catch 8 touchdowns and it wouldn't be surprising at all.
Yeah, and like he's obviously like he's just getting drafted as my tight end 2, or maybe some cases my tight end 3. So like he's not like the tip of the spear as far as my tight end room goes, but I feel like he's just kind of like that solid, boring, reliable guy. I know he's got a little bit dinged up late in camp, but I think he should be ready to go for the start of the season. And I think that you look at that receiving core, it's not a lot of big bodies, so Henry, in the off chance that they ever get into the red zone, I think that he's a decent option there. If it's not Ramondre, Travis Kelce and Noah Fant, Dalton Schultz and Jake Ferguson are kind of my next. Kelce at 21, Fant 17, Schultz 17, and Ferguson at 14.
Yeah, I'm in some trouble at tight end because I've got Jelani Woods all drafted before the injury, always in the last round at 26.9%. So I've got to get that underneath 20. That I know that specifically. It didn't ruin necessarily, but it certainly is it's not what I wanted to see going into week 1 with a lot of my Kelce Mahomes stacks specifically, because I would take Kelce in round 3 or 4 or whatever, not think about tight end until the last round, and usually I'd take Woods. In hindsight, I should have taken, I don't know, like Dulcich like 5 times, something like that. But whatever. I got Travis Kelce at 30.8, which is really high, and that's a part because I just a lot of drafts I saw shaping up a way that I was like, I might as well go with the Mahomes Chiefs stack because I'm going to get Hollywood and Rashee Rice later, and they're cheap too, and why not? And then I'll just, hopefully thread the needle at running back pretty much. I still like those teams if Kelce can stay healthy all year. But if anything, I kind of might want to get more just because I know so many were attached to Jelani Woods. Otherwise, I got Jake Ferguson, George Kittle, Kyle Pitts, Dalton Schultz, and Brock Bowers all right around 20%.
Love it. Okay, those are some good targets. I wish I'm a little light on Pitts. I need to get some more, and I'm a little light on Brock Bowers, and I'd be remiss if I didn't admit this. I have a lot of Davis Allen too, but that just
better than Jelani Woods.
It's 18th round speculative nonsense. If it works out, I will victory lap it, and if it doesn't, then I never said anything about it, and we don't have to worry about it. That's going to wrap it up for us here, breaking down some last minute draft tips and kind of putting our cards on the table with our exposure rates in best ball for this year. My last tip for your drafts this weekend, go to RotoWire.com, get that free trial at RotoWire.com/pod, enter your league settings into the custom rankings, and it will spit out the exact roadmap that you need to dominate your league. You can also import your league into our My Leagues function. I swear by the My Leagues stuff. It works for pretty much every platform that you could possibly play on. Import your league. It gives you best free agents, best lineup decisions, all that good stuff. So couldn't recommend those tools any more than I do. Big thanks to our sponsors over at Blue Wire, over at Fantrax, over at Verse Fantasy, and over at Fantasy Sports Knockout as well. Until next week, when we kick off week 1, thanks for listening.